Northeastern University. My name is A. David Lewis, and I am here with the fantastic class of graphic medicine in the age of COVID. Is that the subtitle? Something like that. Yeah. It's spring 2025, and we have a wonderful group of students here today joining us to talk to Mr. Brian Fies. There he is. Okay, we had an argument, Brian, and I've known
Yes.
you a long time. What is there music playing? I don't know. I've known
Not on
you a
my
long
end.
time, and I've heard your name pronounced Fies and Fies. Which do you use?
Fees. It's German, not Spanish, so it's fees.
That works. Okay. We are here with Brian Fies, author, notable award-winning author of Mom's Cancer, in addition to Fire Story, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. Oh, there we go. He's showing you the goods. He's showing you the wares. And what my students and I attempted to do here, they have all read Mom's Cancer. They got a presentation on Brian's background. We've spent the last 7 weeks, thanks incidentally to the guidance and structure provided by Professor Hilary Shute and by Kaylin Rolls. We've come to this point just before the break where they are now graphic medicine experts and are going to bring their lens, their educational lens, having talked about Hyperbole and a Half and Fun Home by Alison Bechtel and The Thud, and looking at some online and web comics, particularly from the Boston Globe's opinions section, and looking at the Graphic Medicine Manifesto. That's all informing the questions, the burning inquiries they have for Brian. Brian, have I missed anything? Is there anything you would like to address at the outset?
No, first, I'm honored to be asked, so thank you. Thank you, and thanks to the class. I'm a little creeped out that some of you probably know more about me than I know about myself. The only thing I would preface this Q&A session by saying is, don't be afraid to ask me anything. Sometimes people are like, ooh, cancer and fire, and I don't want to, I don't want to cause any flashbacks or PTSD or you can't trigger me. I'm a solid gray rock of, so don't worry about hurting my feelings. Ask me anything.
Okay, you heard that. Have at 'em. All right. I am going to just shuffle over to my additional laptop over there so that I am making sure I don't skip any students, although they might like to be. But I'm just moving over here for a moment. They prepared a number of questions for you today, Brian. Does anyone want to go first? Does anyone feel that their question, you want to go first, man? Yeah, activate. Introduce yourself. Tell Brian who you are, where you're coming from, and then give him your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, with a little echo, but I got you.
Gotcha. Yeah, no,
You know what? I'm going to turn off my audio for a second.
alrighty, does that work?
I do.
Alrighty. Hello, my name is Jared. I'm a fourth year undergraduate student at Northeastern. And yeah, I loved reading your work, so I was wondering if I could ask, throughout the production and publication of the book, what were like the most difficult logistical challenges that you encountered, and how did you overcome them?
I assume you're talking about Mom's Cancer. Mom's Cancer started as a webcomic, and I always sort of had the back of my mind that maybe someday it could be a book and be print, but it was started as a webcomic. And so the most difficult logistical problems I faced were taking what started as a webcomic and turning it into something fit to be print. For example, I thought when I started as a webcomic, well, the web is 72 DPI resolution. So if I scan everything and work in 300 DPI and then shrink it down to 72, that should be all right. Well, 300 is like the minimum resolution you need for print. So I had to go through the whole thing and basically digitally remaster the entire book before it was ready to be published as a book. That kind of thing. So that's in the weeds, inside baseball. But I learned a lot from doing Mom's Cancer that helped me in all my subsequent books. Publication is a whole different thing. And I advise anybody who is doing a web comic or doing work online, if you think someday it's going to be in print, work at the highest resolution you can, and work as if it's going to be in print, because you can always down res it for the web, but really hard to up res it for print.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Was there anything you were
Anything you were tempted to change or update or otherwise edit when you went through that remastering process?
Yeah, I changed a fair amount. And what happens is I had originally done the webcomic Mom's Cancer over a period of time. I think it was like a year and a half, 2 years, really roughly following along in real time my mom's illness and treatment. And my style evolved over that time. You'll see that in old comic strips like Peanuts or Garfield or something like that, where, you know, Garfield starts out looking one way and then 5 years later he looks totally different. Well, that had happened to my characters. So I had to go back and redraw like my mom's head for the first half of the book, because she didn't look the same at the second half of the book as she did in the first half. So I did a lot of that kind of stuff. Coloring was a whole nother challenge. And again, that's probably too inside baseball, but content wise, no, we didn't change anything. In fact, my editor loves to say that his biggest contribution to the book was the very last page, where we kind of show the, you know, the two panel, bad glare, but the two panel grid with, you know, the night sky. He added that, and he says, my biggest contribution to the book was the page that doesn't have any words on it. So otherwise, what you see in the book is more or less what the webcomic looked like.
Very nice. I think we had a discussion at one point about, I asked when you went to print, whether the operation panel, the game operation that has Mom split, whether you were tempted to recombine it for print. And you shared at the time that they actually don't fit together. That secretly, you're keeping them separate because that's the way they were composed for the screen, and they don't actually align.
That's true. I drew them separately on two different pieces of paper, the top half and the bottom half.
Okay.
And yeah, they don't match up completely. Now I've since kind of jimmied them together, because sometimes you want to show people the full page. But there's some meaning in that bifurcation too. The meaning is Mom had two different things going on. She had something going on in her head. She had something going on in her chest. She had head doctors. She had chest doctors. And sometimes those doctors were not on the same page. That's a metaphor, but I could make that literal. I could say her head's on one page and her head doctors are on one page, and her chest doctors are on a different page. And you know, that's a subtle thing. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, no harm done. But that was the intent of the operation board. I just thought of one more thing that changed between the webcomic and the book. And people who are fans of the webcomic still talk about this. When I did the webcomic, let me see if I can find it real fast. My idea was Cancerland would be a little like Alice in Wonderland for Mom, that she was going to enter this strange fantasy realm. And my conceit was that all the other characters besides my family would be drawn as some kind of a weird fantasy creature. So that early in the book, this first physician she goes to, this osteopath, I drew the osteopath as a giant duck because she was a quack. And then, you know, I'm working on the book and I come up against the next character who's outside the family, and I couldn't think of a good metaphor for them. So I drew them looking like a person. And the next character comes along and I couldn't really think of anything good for them. So I drew them like a person. And then you get about 50 pages in and everybody's saying, nice story. What's with the giant duck? So I redrew the osteopath. I rethought that. I redrew the osteopath as a human being. But if you look closely on her lapel, there's a little duck pin. And that acknowledges her origins as a quack.
That's wonderful.
So,
I love that. Thank you.
I did sort of change my approach to the book in that respect.
We talked the other day about cancer narratives that engage in allegory versus engaging in more directly experiential storytelling. So I'd like to hear that that was in the original DNA. Would anyone like to go next? Or I can call on people, activate the camera and go ahead, introduce yourself to Brian.
Hello, okay, the mic. I'm Isabel Song, and I kind of had a question about one specific panel.
Mhm.
So it's page 24,
All right. I
and
happen to have that.
I
Oh,
noticed
yeah.
like this is the only one with photorealism, and I like was looking at the cases, and I was wondering if these are ones you actually read.
Yeah, I collected several hundred pages of research that I put all in binders and stuff. And these are literally some of the things I was reading out of there. Is it the only, I guess it is the only case of photorealism. I've done it in, well, there's a little bit of an Apollo spaceship later on, but yeah, that's an interesting observation. Um, I think I just wanted it to be look like an overwhelming amount of information and to give it sort of the verisimilitude of yes, I actually did read these pages and try to understand them as best I could, and several hundred more pages like them. But yeah, this is the actual material I was reading during that time.
Yeah, I was just wondering like the stylistic choice behind that, because none of the other ones have it.
Yeah, I could make up a lot of stuff. I could make up something. The honest answer that most cartoonists will give you most of the time, if they're being honest, is it seemed like a good idea at the time. I don't have anything smarter to say about than that. I could make sort of a ex post facto, oh, it's, the intrusion of reality into the, analogy space or something, but that's just baloney. It just seemed like a good idea. And I wanted to, I wanted to, maybe remind the reader that this was real, you know, that the situation was real, that these were real pages I'd read, real concerns I had, real research I'd done. And I guess I could have drawn all those pages, but I think it wouldn't have had the same impact.
One other question I had was, how do you value color in your own comics, and how do you use that intentionally?
Well, with Mom's Cancer, it was super intentional because whenever color is used in Mom's Cancer, it's either the kind of sepia toned, view of the past, which is pretty obvious, or it's color is something that takes Mom or the family out of their everyday life. It's the Wizard of Oz use of color. It's we're going from the black and white of Kansas to the colorfulness of Oz, and so that's what color means in Mom's Cancer. I think color is super important, and I always do my own coloring. A lot of cartoonists farm that out, but I always do my own because I think color is a very important and underappreciated way of conveying meaning in stories. Um, Setting mood, running hot or cold, telling people what they ought to look at, what they need to focus on. I don't know if, one of my favorite examples of color in all of media is in Schindler's List, where you have the girl in the red coat walking through the gray of concentration camp. Um, and you just watch that girl go through the camp in her little red coat. Um, and so I think about those things. I think about setting mood, telling a story through color. Um, it's a very subliminal thing, but I think it's really super important. And so I take color very seriously and try to use it smartly. And it turns out I've ended up using it in different ways in all of my books. So um, it's fun to play with.
I know we're going to get to a question at some point on fire stories, so if you want to bring the discussion of color back there and how it's any different, we'd welcome that. We're going to try one little experiment. When it's your turn to speak, don't turn your microphone on. We're going to see if the classroom mic alone will pick you up. So please show your face, but project like me. Would anyone else like to ask Brian the next question? Yeah, please, Marga, you're in the back.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Margot. I'm a fourth year media arts. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
I had a question about what your families, like what their reactions to it were, if they had any strong feelings about the story being published, if that changed throughout the process and how that might have influenced what you were doing?
Yes, I love this question because again, Mom's Cancer started as a webcomic. And when I first started it, it was anonymous. I didn't have my name attached to it, and I didn't tell my family about it when I first started it. Partly that was I was a coward. Number one, I was a coward. Number two, it was sort of the whole idea of the anthropologist doesn't want the natives to know they're being watched because they change their behavior. I didn't want my family changing their behavior around me saying, oh, geez, Brian's over there taking notes. He's going to put this in his comic. So at first, I did Mom's Cancer totally anonymously. And then it went viral by early 20th century standards of viral. I was getting, tens of thousands of visitors a day. And one day I got an email from a guy who said, hey, I think I know your sisters. And I said, oh, shit. So I called my family that day. I called everybody and said, hey, I've been working on this little project. Here's the URL. Go take a look. Tell me what you think. And my mom got back to me right away. And my mom said, I love it. I can't wait to find out what happens next. And if my mom had been at all unhappy or distressed or didn't like it, or had rather I didn't do it, I would have just killed it and it never would have seen the light of day. It never would have happened. If my mom had, because I didn't want to do a single thing to make my mom's life a little bit harder at all. So
was this concurrent with her treatment process? It wasn't retrospective. It was at the time that she was going through the cancer journey.
Yeah, I was writing or posting pages online about maybe a couple months behind the actual events. And I found that was very helpful to me because as this is a little diversion, but as events happened, I would write them down and take notes and do little sketches and doodles, but then I had to put them aside and let them sit. To see how they fit the narrative, because I didn't want this just to be a diary comic of on Wednesday we did this and on Thursday we did that. I wanted it to be a story that had a beginning and middle and an end and arcs. And even though I didn't know what was going to happen to the characters, I wanted them to have, character arcs like a traditional story would. So I set it aside, let it sit, and that was about maybe a 2-month lag there. So yeah, my mom was still undergoing her treatment and such when she found out about it. And my sisters were a little less sanguine. My sisters are more like, well, I don't remember things like that, but if you do, go ahead. My sister, Kid Sis, whose real name is Elizabeth, is actually a filmmaker, screenwriter, and she'd been doing something similar. She was writing a screenplay of the whole thing, and so she said, "I get it. I understand." And then I also gave my stepdad a call, the dad who lives on the commune in New Mexico. And I don't treat him kindly in the book. He died, I think, I treat him honestly, but I think I don't treat him kindly. And I was prepared to lose my relationship with him over it. But I had to tell him, and I said, go take a look at this. And to his credit, he called me back and said, pretty much the same thing my sisters did, which is, that's not how I remember it, but you go ahead and you got to tell your story your way. And that meant so much to me that I think it sort of made our relationship better ever since. It was his approval, or his, is okay of my going ahead with that, meant a lot to me. So I had different circles of approval. If my mom hadn't liked it, I would have killed it. If my sisters had come across something they didn't like, I might have thought about rewriting it or something. If they said, I don't think you're treating me very fairly there. They never did. But if they had, I might have jiggled things around a little bit to make my sisters happy. If my dad had said, I don't like it, I would have said, tough beans, Dad, but he didn't. So I've heard Alison Bechdel talked about this too I'm sorry, Dave.
Stronger language than tough beans.
Well, yeah, and I've heard Alison Bechdel talk about this in the context of Fun Home and Are You My Mother and that kind of thing, where she says you sort of have to decide when you're doing a memoir who you're willing to betray and what your lines in the sand are. And I have mine, and other people have theirs. So So the reaction was good. And if it hadn't been good, I think it could have been a different book or not a book at all.
Fantastic. Margot, did you want to add something?
Yeah, there is just when you were talking about like the different narrative arcs and stuff, everyone has it. I just had another question too about like how did you find the balance between the experiential side and the actual like narrative arc side? Like did you feel it naturally? Because a lot of it is still based on like around your experience as well.
Yeah. I wrote, or drafted a lot more material than I used. So in my mind, it was an editing project. It was start with a lot and kind of simplify it down into something that told the story I thought was there that I wanted to tell. I was also very conscious, and I had to keep reminding myself that although I'm a character in the book, it wasn't my story, it was Mom's story. So in my first drafts, there was a lot of stuff about me and, oh, woe is me and how bad I feel about all this. And, a lot about what was going on in my head. And I took all that out, almost all that out, because it wasn't my story, it was my mom's. So it's it's a 128-page book, which is a short book. It could have been a 300-page book if I'd included all the stuff I'd originally written. But I really wanted to just hone it down into this one little gem that said exactly what I wanted to say and nothing else.
Is any of that apocrypha anywhere out there? Have you ever thought of collecting that as well?
Oh, not anymore, because I had this fire in 2017,
Okay.
and it just destroyed everything. I mean, these would have been handwritten notes in a file, and no, it's the apocrypha is gone.
Okay. Fire story question. Can we touch on that? That seems like a good segue.
Yeah. Can you hear me over the classroom mics?
Yes, that works.
Okay, cool. So I'm from Los Angeles, and I know people who have recently gone through the same thing as you this past January. So I found it really fascinating that you've written this narrative about losing your home in a fire. And I was sort of wondering, like, how that felt, like what sort of drove you, what was the imperative to do that, and then what was the imperative to kind of share it and bear witness to it so that other people who maybe are not from the same kind of problematic state as us can sort of understand it better.
Great question.
I really like that you used the term bear witness. In my first job out of college, I was a newspaper reporter. And I just did that for a few years. But then after that, I was a freelance journalist. And I really felt like every book I do, even the fiction ones, are a form of journalism where I'm just trying to tell the story as straight and true as I can. Even if I've made it up, I'm still trying to be as straight and honest and economical as I can. I felt that way about Mom's cancer. And so when our fire happened, as I was walking back into my neighborhood the morning after the fire, before I even knew my house had been destroyed for sure, I realized happened to end up in the middle of this big historic event, this newsworthy event, and I was in a unique position to tell people about it. So that sort of journalism gene kicked in, where it was interesting because as I think I go through life with a pair of eyeballs floating above my shoulder, watching me go through life. And so I'm walking in my neighborhood and I'm taking things in, but I've got this pair of eyeballs over me saying, okay, Brian, you're kind of going into shock now, but look around, take some pictures because you're going to be telling the story later. You're going to need these pictures for reference, and pay attention to what you're seeing and try to take in what you can. But while you're going into shock, Brian, please pay attention because you're going to be writing about this later. And so even before I knew my house was gone, I knew I'd be doing something about it. And because I had the model of Mom's cancer, I knew I'd be doing it in the form of a comic because I'd already done a nonfiction comic about a very serious topic. I knew it could be done successfully. And so I really just followed the model of Mom's cancer. The day after the fire, I went to a Target store and I bought clothes and I bought shoes and I bought underwear and I bought food and I bought art supplies. And I started writing and drawing the comic the day after the fire and started putting online 2 days after the fire. And it also went viralish, and something like 700,000 people went and saw that comic online. And what I heard back, the feedback I got on that was, I saw your fire on the news, but your comic was the first thing I'd read that made me understand what it was like to be there. And that was exactly what I was going for. That was the point of it. You know, if you want to know what's going on with the fire, okay, you watch your news and you see the videos and you see, but if you want to know what it felt like, I think comics are a wonderful medium for that, for empathy, for self-reflection, for self-revelation. To me, that's the great power of comics, is when a comic's really working, it feels like telepathy from my brain into your brain. And that was what I wanted to achieve. And I think I kind of did that with the web version of A Fire Story. And then, so time passed, and a little time. And I heard from my editor. I've had the same editor and publisher for all my books. His name is Charlie Kochman, and he works at Abrams Books. And he called me or emailed me one day and said, "Hey, Brian, you got a lot going on. You just lost your house. I understand you're in a tough spot, but if you ever want to make that webcomic into a book, we'll publish it." So this is my pro tip for any wannabe, aspiring authors. When a publisher calls you and says, "We'll publish your book," you say yes. That's my pro tip. So, but it was a work of journalism. I really saw myself as like a war correspondent reporting from the front lines of a war. That's what I was aiming for. You are there. These are the little things you think about that isn't going to show up on the evening news, but this is what it's like to be there.
I want to go to Ro's question next, but let me just, as an aside, we did get into a further discussion here, Brian, about climate change and climate disaster and how it overlaps, if there's a Venn diagram, with graphic medicine. Do you see Fire Story, when you're doing talks on graphic medicine, presumably about mom's cancer, do you feel that Fire Story fits into that discussion as well?
You know, it hasn't, but I think it could and maybe should. I think it's tenuous, and I think partly I have maybe a stricter definition of graphic medicine than other people do, which has come out. I don't remember if you and I, David, were on the same panel. We were trying to come up with some graphic medicine awards, and there were a lot of books where I'm just like, I don't know if this is graphic medicine, and everybody else was against me. Yeah, it's graphic medicine, you idiot. So I think my definition is a little strict, but when I did the web version of Fire Story in 2017, right after the fire, I didn't think of it as a book about climate change. I thought it was just, it was easy to see my fire as just one of those weird things that happens every 70 or 80 years somewhere in the world. And then the year after my fire, there was the Camp Fire, which destroyed the city of Chico. And when my fire happened, it was the most destructive wildfire in California history. The next year, the Camp Fire destroyed twice as much land, twice as many houses. It became the most destructive wildfire in California history. Every damn year, there was another new most destructive fire in California history. And it didn't take too many years of that for me to think that that's not a record that should be broken every year, And I came, by the time we did the print book, and especially by the time we did the paperback edition, which I added 32 new pages of content to, I really realized that, yes, this is a book about climate change. Rebecca Solnit, the writer, called it a book of climate grief, and I thought that was a wonderful way of putting it. I think it's a book about climate grief. I think there is going to be a whole library of literature about climate change in the coming decades and maybe centuries. And I now look at A Fire Story as an early entry into that body of work, although I didn't at the time, but I really think of it that it's that now.
That's both fascinating and chilling, but I do think that's accurate. And
let me add, please. You mentioned, doing this book that had I forget what the question was, but it was something like regional interest or something like that. And I've gone and given book talks in Washington State, Oregon State, Southern California, Colorado. I've talked to people up in British Columbia. Sometimes it seems like the whole western half of North America is on fire. And wherever I go and whoever I talk to, the story is exactly the same as mine. It's the same kind of once a century fire that nobody saw coming, that just tears through because drought has weakened the trees and there's no resilience left in nature, it seems, so that the slightest little thing can touch off, a 60,000 acre blaze. And that was what was so heartbreaking about the Southern California fires for many of us in Northern California was, first of all, we all know people down there, but the Southern California, the LA fires, were so similar to ours. The way they set up, the way the wind came up, the way the fire swept over mountains and down into plains. The geography of Northern California and Southern California isn't that different. And it just broke our hearts. Every firestorm since mine has broken my heart a little bit, especially like the Maui folks. I've talked to some of the Maui people in Lahaina, but those LA fires were just heartbreaking, partly because we've been through it and we know what those people are going through for not just in the immediate aftermath of fire, but for the next months and years. It's a marathon, not a sprint. But it just brought back so many feelings and memories of ours, and you just wish, we could have prevented that somehow, but I don't know how you could.
I still want to tie this to Rel's question. Would you mind sharing it with Brian?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Roel. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So earlier in the term, we read an excerpt from Art Spiegelman, who sort of pushed back against the idea that creating his deeply personal work was a cathartic experience for him. And he described it more as an intellectual and emotional burden rather than a means of personal healing. So I'm curious whether you find any catharsis in creating your own work, or do you share his sentiment that that type of work doesn't necessarily provide emotional relief?
This is a wonderful question. This is the best question I've been asked in a long, long time. Give him an A. Give him an A. When I first started doing Mom's Cancer and I told my wife about it, she said, well, at least it'll be good therapy for you. And it is therapeutic in the sense that to write about something, you have to understand it well. You have to be clear in your own head about how you feel about something and examine your own feelings about a thing before you can tell other people how you feel about it. So it's therapeutic in that way. I hadn't heard Art Spiegelman say that, but I think I agree with him completely. There is a sense in which writing about something helps you work through it fine. There's also a sense in which writing a book about something means you just keep scratching that wound, man. I'm here talking to you about Mom's Cancer, which happened 20 years ago. And, and as I said at the start, ask me anything, I can take it, but it keeps it fresh. And especially with the fire story, we had a group of people come over to our county from Maui recently to just see how a community recovers from a fire like that. And so we're all gathered in the park and our county supervisor is there. And I just kind of leaned over to him and said, oh, great. One more day where I get to tell a bunch of strangers about the worst day of my life, and there's a feeling like that, like, oh, let me just keep scratching that wound a little more and, bring up the worst day of my life and tell 50 people all about that. And here I am talking to a class about, my mom dying. And so cathartic, I think is not the right word for it. Necessary is good. I knew the job was dangerous when I took it, I kind of agree. I think I agree with Art. I don't think it's very healing. I think it's, people who don't write books about the worst day of their lives kind of, get it calloused over and move on. And I've also done that. I've moved on. I have a wonderful life and a new house, and I'm very, very happy. And my days are often filled with joy, but, sometimes you just keep bringing it up because that's your job. So it's a mix. I love that question, though.
Yeah, I want to go to Haw's question next. Can we do that?
By the way, it's hard to say that without sounding like you're whining. Like, ooh, feel sorry for me. I wrote a book. It's like, well, nobody made you write the book, dumbass. But
it's are interpreting that as whining. In fact, I was wondering if you were putting an extra nice face on it, limiting the emotion to it, but we trust you as an adult.
Well, the other thing that happens, and this is just something any writer, anybody who talks to the public will tell you, is you get kind of rote about it. I mean, I've got a talk, and I've given that talk 50 times, and I can get that talk is just like slipping a cassette in the player, and you push play and you go, and I don't really wrap a lot of emotions up in it. That's why I love this Q&A kind of thing, because anything can happen, and I have to think about things, and it's not rote, and so I enjoy this much more. Not that I'm not phoning in those talks. I'm doing my best work on those talks, but when I'm talking to you, I'm not slipping the cassette into the player.
Ahoy, can you give yours, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
So, hi, my name is Hua, and I got a question about the ending, and it's like, were there any real life moments after your mother diagnosis that like didn't make it into the book, but then like it shaped your like approaches to the ending?
Do you need me to repeat that, Brian, or did you?
Yes, please. I was going to ask. She's very soft-spoken.
Mind if I repeat it? So Ho's question was, were there any real life moments after your mom's diagnosis that didn't make it into the book, but still shaped how you approached the ending?
Wow. That's a smart question. I'm not sure I can answer that. The answer is yes. With the caveat that anything that shaped the ending, I felt obliged to include in the book, because I wanted to build the characters in the story so that the reader never got to a spot and said, wait, where'd that come from? So anything that appears in the book later has some foundation earlier, and that's just basic, decent storytelling, I think. There was a lot that happened in real life that didn't make it into the book, as I described earlier, but I tended to edit out things that didn't drive my mom's story. It was all about my mom, and I had to keep reminding myself this book's about my mom and my mom's experience. So there was stuff about me, stuff about my sisters, stuff about other people. I cut entire people out of the book, different friends and doctors and so forth, because they didn't contribute to that laser focus on telling my mom's experience. So, but that doesn't really answer your question. It's a good question. I don't have a good answer for it. I apologize.
The other day about the challenge, whether it's a limitation, I couldn't say, but about making a graphic medicine experience fit the shape of a story. Because as much as that's the currency we sort of travel in, not all of these experiences fit cleanly into as you're shooting for, a narrative arc, a character arc.
Right.
So I understand that that's challenging. And I imagine even journalistic reporters have to think about that. How do they make this news into something that is a comprehensible tale?
Yeah, in either case, you want to tell a story, but I think there's a difference in application when you're telling a story that you're in the middle of and when you're telling a story that you can look back on. When you look back on something, you've got the perspective, and you can say, oh, that was relevant, that was irrelevant, that you can, with the perspective of distance, you get a much clearer view of the story. Whereas, when you're a war correspondent reporting from the front, you don't see the whole battlefield, you don't see the whole campaign. You can talk about what's right in front of you. So it's a mix of those two things. There are graphic novels, comics about illness and about other things that are, as I was referring to earlier, just kind of diaries. Like, here's what happened today, here's what happened tomorrow, here's what happened the next day. And those have value. That's just not the kind of story I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell a story that I hope would draw people in and engross them, make them care about the characters, and have a beginning, middle, and end, even though I didn't know what the end was going to be when I started. And the end surprised me, because, if you've read the book, you know that the comic part of the book ends with my mom going into remission and moving to Southern California to live happily ever after. And my God, first of all, what a surprise. Second of all, what a wonderful ending. And then in the time between when I finished the webcomic and when we published it as a book, literally a week before the hard deadline for sending that book to the printer, my mom passed. Her condition took a quick turn for the worst and she passed. And so there's that last page in the book that my editor and I wrote up in 20 minutes and just slammed on the back page because there was nowhere else to put it, telling the rest of the story about how my mom had passed. And we debated whether to put that in there at all, because without it, it's kind of a nice, happy story about a lady who went into remission and survived her cancer. And I felt very strongly that, no, we'd been honest with the reader throughout the whole book. And we owed it to them to be honest in the end. So, yeah.
About 20 minutes left. I want to get to as many of the questions as possible. I want to ask Jessica if she feels her question was already answered. Where's Jessica?
I feel like I was answering.
Yeah, Jessica had basically the question, was it about documenting personal experience or to share with the world? And I do think you touched on that. I would love to shift over. So Jessica, I didn't want to steamroll over you at all. I appreciate the contribution.
Well, I have something to say about that, if you don't mind. Because my intention in doing Mom's Cancer turned out not to be correct. My intention with Mom's Cancer was I was going to draw a roadmap for people coming along cancer world behind us. And it sort of did that. But what I found when the book was out was that people who had cancer had no interest in reading a book about cancer. And they didn't particularly need it because they were already the experts. They already, they were experienced scouts on the same road I'd traveled with my family. Now the people around them, I think, got some benefit from it. And then, graphic medicine didn't exist when I started Mom's Cancer or when I published Mom's Cancer. Graphic medicine was kind of, I'm going to be a little braggadocious here. Mom's Cancer was one of the books that started graphic medicine because the people who started graphic medicine found Mom's Cancer and said, well, this is something. And so graphic medicine has just been this incredibly gratifying, rich, I can't think of enough good words to describe how I feel about graphic medicine and Mom's Cancer's place in it that I had no way of foreseeing when I did Mom's Cancer because there was no graphic medicine. The idea that I occasionally get asked to talk to people like you, or in a couple of weeks I'm giving a talk to medical students at Stanford University, and it's just like, wow. The people who really seem to get the most out of Mom's Cancer are students like you. People are going to be doctors and nurses who read it and say, wow, I didn't know patients would see me like that, and I'm going to change the way I do. I've had doctors tell me I'm going to change the way I do my practice because of what I read in Mom's Cancer. I didn't intend that, but it's a wonderful outcome.
That ties right into, I think, one of Ashlyn's questions.
Yeah, it's actually super related. So hi, Mr. Fies. My name is Ashlyn. I am a fourth year studying neuroscience and art at Northeastern, and I'm actually applying to medical school in just a few months. One of my incentives to take graphic medicine this semester was to better understand the physician-patient experience through art. And Mom's Cancer was a great work to study this. And I actually had the honor of giving a presentation on you on Wednesday. But
I'm honored.
You.
And now you're incredibly disappointed because you're like, oh God, that guy.
No, it's so good to hear from you. I wanted to ask, what advice would you give healthcare providers about improving communication and empathy with patients and their families?
You'd have to ask the doctors and nurses, but what I took away, my answer to that as a relative of a patient would be, understand that your patients are overwhelmed, and there's the picture, the image of in Mom Cancer of my mom drowning in medical jargon. My mom was a very intelligent woman, but it was just too much, too fast. She couldn't take it all in. She was drinking from a fire hose, as the cliche goes. And so I think my advice to medical professionals would be mindful of how much information your patients can take in. make sure it sticks, because you can say something in a meeting and they'll walk out in the parking lot. My family and I literally did this, and we'll look at each other and just say, what just happened? You know, the doctor was talking to us, but we'll get out there and we won't remember what they said. So my advice to patients is always have someone go along with you to take notes, because you're going to need those notes later. My advice to doctors is deliver information in such a way that a layman could take those notes and understand what you were telling them. And you might have to explain something 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times to have it really sink in. So that's a big part of it. It's just that empathy, that understanding of, because you're the doctor and you understand it and you think you said it once, so they ought to get it. They're not going to get it.
And one up. By the way, my hand gestures are signaling to students for them to go next. It's not meant to distract from your answer. But I will make a pitch here that take-home information in graphic medicine form could not only be more accessible and comprehensible, but also deal with any language barriers or comprehension issues. So there's a further application of that here.
Oh, there have been a ton of studies about how people absorb graphic, comics information or information in the form of a comic much better, retain it much better than they do just text. Some of my favorite examples of graphic medicine are just sort of the pure nuts and bolts of what you would imagine a health comic would be. The Seattle Public Health Department put out a book about avoiding the flu, a comic book drawn by David Lasky, and I think Meredith Lee Volmer wrote it.
It was Meredith.
Yeah, and they've published, well, it's digital, but they put it out in like 57 languages or something, and it's available online. I love that. One of my favorite examples was at early graphic medicine conferences, a psychiatrist named Neil Phillips came from Australia, and he had done comics to explain mental health resources to people whose first language was not English, to people in the outback and so forth. And again, that's not telling a story. That's just delivering public health information, but very powerful, very useful.
Leah, can we go to you next?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not on the Zoom call. I came in a little bit late, but I was just wondering, and we've kind of touched on this, but did you ever imagine this comic getting as much attention as it did, and how has that shaped how you viewed the experience that you had? Has it made you view it differently? And also, do you ever wonder, because I know you said your mom approved of your work on it, but do you ever wonder what she would think now, this many years later, that it's still being talked about and still this important work?
No, it is unusual for a book to stay in print as long as Mom's Cancer. It's still in print. And I know you're recording this, but I'm going to tell you a secret and this is, I haven't signed any contracts or deals here, but we're working on a possible 20th anniversary edition of Mom's Cancer.
Beautiful.
That might be coming out next year. Now that's a big might, but that's when I hang up with this call, I'm going to go work on that. No, I had no idea. I don't know if I really thought about that when I was doing it. I mean, everybody hopes that their book will do well and be seen by people, but the idea that this would happen, that graphic medicine would happen, that I'd be talking to you guys now in the year 2025, good Lord. That would have been science fiction. So no, I had no idea. And as I said earlier, when I did it, graphic medicine didn't exist as a discipline. My mom would be so happy and proud that her story has had this effect. My mom always sort of had a dramatic flair anyway. She loved being an extra in movies and so forth. And I think so she would have appreciated the attention. She got fan letters while she was still alive, and the webcomic came out, and she loved that. I think Mom always saw Mom's Cancer as an opportunity to turn this really horrible thing that had happened to her into something good, to pull something good out of this awful experience. And I think, by golly, that's been its history. That's its legacy.
I want to acknowledge that Michelle had a similar question about catharsis. I don't want to overlook that. Michelle, was there any other aspect of that you wanted to cover with Brian, or do you feel you got a robust answer?
No, I think he's covered everything I asked. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the question I have here, did I get, who else didn't I cover? Janshu, did I get you?
No.
Would you mind sharing yours?
Okay. So hi, my name is Tianfu Li, and I'm third year at Northeastern. And my question is like, what has been the most surprising and more meaningful response you have received from the readers about mom's cancer?
Well, one of the most memorable responses I got to mom's cancer was one of the very first, because as I said, it started as a web comic. And we all know that the World Wide Web is worldwide. And, but very early on in mom's cancer, I got an email from a nursing instructor in Queensland, Australia, who said, can I print out some of your pages from your comic because I'd like to show them my nursing students, tell them what they're going to be experiencing when they go out and talk to patients. It's like a remote nursing program where the nurses would go out to people's houses and take care of them, or remote communities and take care of them. And that just hit me like a thunderbolt because, like I say, we all know that the World Wide Web is worldwide, but the idea that I would put something online, I would upload it to my website at 10 in the morning, and by 5 that night, I'd get an email from Queensland, Australia saying, can I print out your pages and use them to teach nurses how to do their job? That was extraordinary. That was extraordinarily powerful. That meant a lot to me, and it's still one of my favorite outcomes. And I know mom's cancer has been used in smoking cessation clinics and stuff like that, and I think that's really nice. What's interesting from my perspective as an author is you don't really know what your book is doing out in the world until somebody tells you. So I'm very grateful when somebody will just drop me a line and say, I saw your book here, I saw it there, we used it in this class or something. It's like, I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me. So just this whole idea that my book's out there kind of having this big secret life that I don't know anything about is gratifying in its own right. I like that. And then the whole idea of physicians telling me they were going to change the way they do their practice. Totally unintended, hugely gratifying for me.
I'll just add, we're here at Northeastern University today. I'm delighted to be doing it with this class. These discussions are happening at universities all across the country, if not the world. Graphic medicine is flourishing. I have a class at MCPHS University where, Brian, we've talked about mom's cancer as well, and it's giving my students insights into what their parents went through with their parents. It's giving my students insight into what my generation may be going through with what was maybe a past or an elderly generation. So I see a whole nother crop of audience and readers for a 20th anniversary that could certainly still benefit from it. We're coming up towards the end here. I want to challenge my friend and colleague, Brian, with a slightly off-kilter question, if you don't mind. I think you're absolutely right. You were there at the onset of graphic medicine as a recognized subfield discipline concern. We've talked about some examples that preceded that. We've talked about Binky Brown meets the Holy Virgin Mary. We could go further back into Rudolf Templer or even to ancient Egyptian glyphs, but I'd rather look forward. I want to just take one more minute before we wrap up to talk about the future of graphic medicine, just from your perspective, from someone that was there at a surprising onset of it. Where do you see it factoring in? You could comment politically, you could comment technologically with AI, you could comment about healthcare worldwide or domestically. Just shoot forward for us, and where do you see it having promise, perils, or the unexpected?
Well, my first thought is that the fate of graphic medicine is pretty closely tied to the fate of comics in society in general. Comics still face a stigma that they're not serious, that they're illiterate or pre-literate, or a nice way to get kids into reading real books. So comics are overcoming that, and graphic medicine still faces that, with the addition of doctors who say, yeah, comics are fine if you want to, talk to 5-year-olds, but let's get serious here, folks. So there's still that stigma. There's, we're still a little bit of a ghetto, a little bit of a niche. And I think, I suspect we'll always be a niche, but I think we're going to become gradually a more respected niche. More and more medical schools are going to have medical humanities classes that incorporate graphic medicine into them. More and more hospitals and so forth are realizing comics are a good way to communicate with patients. Public health departments, same thing. I was joking with the last graphic medicine conference I went to was a few years ago. And I was joking with some of my friends there, saying, just in terms of being a graphic medicine creator with Mom's Cancer, I sort of feel like Wilbur Wright watching a bunch of jets fly overhead, because Mom's Cancer was early, and it's not primitive, but it's early. And many people have done much more ambitious and sophisticated work since then. And I applaud them and encourage them, and, shoot for the stars, kids. But that's going to continue for sure. I mean, and by the way, you mentioned many graphic medicine predecessors, and yeah, you can go back years, and Our Cancer Year and all kinds of other books, Pinky Brown, Stuck Rubber Baby. I never made any claim that Mom's Cancer was first, just kind of, it was in the right place at the right time to inspire a couple people to start having conferences and stuff. But
you were there as it coalesced. I mean, I don't think it's unfair to say that you were there when this started. We started recognizing each other and started to form a community.
Well, it's been neat. That's a neat thing about it is, I went to the first graphic medicine conference in London in 2010. I was invited over there to give a talk, and there were maybe 60 or 70 people. It was a one-day conference in one room, and that was graphic medicine. That was all of it. And then we started having these conferences every year, and we picked up stragglers like you, and people added on and came in. And there came a time, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I was talking to M.K. Zerwick, who was one of the starters of graphic medicine. And we were just talking, we said, this has gotten big enough that we don't know everybody who's doing it anymore. There was a time when you could fit all of graphic medicine into a decent sized room. That's not true anymore. It's not dozens of people, it's hundreds of people, it's thousands of people doing it, teaching it, learning it. And we were just kind of joking. We were kind of talking to each other. Have you ever heard of this guy? Oh yeah, I talked to him once. He's cool. And do you know that person? Oh yeah, they're and so we sort of had to compare notes, and and as I think you alluded to earlier, it's become an international phenomenon as well. There's a big graphic medicine push going on in India. There's some people in Japan doing some fantastic work on graphic medicine. It's really taking off in some amazing and wonderful ways.
Want to say, I hope I'm speaking for the whole class, that we super appreciate your time today and your work, and you have contributed to seeding a whole nother generation of graphic novel enthusiasts, scholars, creators, or just fans. So guys, can we say thank you and applaud for Mr. Brian Fies?
Well, thank you. I'm honored to be asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.
Anytime.